Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 1st of February, and gosh, tomorrow would be Groundhog's Day, or in Alaska anyway, the Hoary Marmot's Day. So we'll be watching to see what happens, or maybe you won't. But if you like to see if rodents see their shadows and can predict the weather, or as it were, climate, maybe we'll throw in a little monthly climate prediction there and talk about the summer that's surely coming your way, eventually, somehow. 800-472-0391 is the number for the Alaska Weather Information Line. You can always find us online at weather.gov/Alaska or Anchorage/Juneau or /Fairbanks, of course. NWS.AR.TV weather at NOAA.gov is a place to find us for email. And if you ever have any questions, feel free to hit us there or on social media. Tag us with Twitter or leave a comment or a question for us on Facebook at NWS Alaska anytime. I want to start off with kind of a little something out of the ordinary. We're going to start with Friday's chart, and I really want to focus in on what you see here across southeastern Alaska. We have very strong high pressure, a ridge that's above 1,040 millibars stretching into western Canada, and we've got a low just off of the Pacific Northwest. So we've got a mound of air here and a really deep canyon of air here, and all of this wants to just rush all the way down toward the low pressure system. So, in this case, this is what would be a Taku wind event for areas around Juneau, including downtown Juneau, the Douglas area, as well as western Juneau and Dehne. And in this region, we could see some pretty strong gusts out of the north and northeast, and some of those could make their way upwards towards 60 to 80 miles per hour. Now, right now, the main focus is going to be around the Juneau region here, but the entirety of southeastern Alaska is probably looking at some gusty conditions, maybe not quite that strong, but it is going to be a blustery day. Do you see the lines of constant pressure here that are just packed in, telling us how steep that gradient is? If you were looking at a topo map, if you're a hiker, you would understand this fairly well. If you're looking at a topo map, this would be the mountain and this would be the canyon here. And all of that air just wants to run down the hill just like you would. If you poured a glass of water down the hill, it would certainly run toward the canyon. This is the same exact thing. So right now we have a high wind watch posted for the Juneau region. That's going to start up as we head into tomorrow. The winds should start to pick up quickly tomorrow evening. The worst of it will be Friday, but the watch goes all the way through Saturday. So this is going to be several hours of potential for high wind. Now, we'll probably refine this as we go, and if it looks like it's a pretty sure thing, or at least a close to sure thing, we'll give this a high wind warning name, or maybe even just an advisory if the winds don't look quite so severe. If it doesn't look like it's going to happen, they'll cancel the watch, or perhaps even expand it to more areas around southeast. In any case, be ready for some wind gusts. It does look like there will be some blustery situations setting up across southeast, and maybe those could reach upwards of 60 to 80 miles per hour. So plan accordingly as you start into tomorrow night. If it's trash day on Friday, look down toward the, let's see, that'd be the southwest. That was a little bit like doing math on air. You never do that live. Here's a look at the north coast, and we're still watching for a blizzard warning that'll continue through tonight and into early tomorrow morning. Wind gusts there, 35 to 55 miles per hour. Now, we're not dealing with a true blizzard, I guess, because we're not actually giving it more snow. But we do have strong and gusty winds. We do have poor visibility, and we are going to see that continue for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast at least until about 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. So a blizzard warning for you continues in that area. Here's a look at the satellite picture, and if you look carefully, all of the clouds are pretty much moving in a south to northerly direction, but undercutting that now at the surface are northerly winds working down the eastern part of Alaska. And we're going to see that working into parts of southeastern Alaska. Those gusts will be coming in from the north and east as we get into Thursday night and Friday. But all of this moisture and all of the heat is pushing its way up across the Bering Sea, working its way into the Gulf. The main storm track, though, is pretty convoluted, really. When you see the upper level winds here in just a little bit, you're going to say, what on earth is that? We pretty much have a ridge of high pressure, an upside down shaped U pattern across Alaska, but the main storm track, that super highway of weather, is way down here, way out of reach. So we're just kind of getting these pieces zipping up and pieces zipping down on either side, but really nothing much happening in the middle. So if you saw plenty of sunshine today where you were, that's probably why. High pressure is really establishing a very dominant hold on most of Alaska and western Alaska. In fact, pressure levels were up above 1,050 millibars for some parts of the interior today. So pilots, you know that's a red flag, so we do color that in red, of course. There were some pockets of snowflakes falling out there. Didn't look like anything too serious. In fact, precipitation was pretty hard to come by for most places. Even Seward didn't see that much precipitation today, a little bit more than 3/4 of an inch there. So a drier day for you, not certainly a dry day by any stretch, but drier. Out across the central chain, we saw clouds moving northward quickly and blowing snow up across the North Slope and the Chukchi Seacoast, as you would expect. Now, as we get into tonight, once again, most of Alaska is going to be pretty dry. High pressure sitting across the eastern Brooks Range. There may be a few snow showers on the eastern side just across the Alcan border. Most of that is really going to be out of reach. Looks like the big issue, though, is going to be the wind across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, and that's why the blizzard warning continues at this hour. Across the central chain, pockets of rainfall there. It's warm enough for rain, in fact, all the way to just about the Gulf of Anadyr and west of St. Matthew. Watching for blowing snow north of that and through the Bering Strait. A few clouds around the mountain ranges, and that looks to be about it. Maybe a pocket of rain or snow showers, fairly isolated across the Pacific coast of the Alaska Peninsula and the south end of Kodiak Island. Few clouds across parts of southeast, otherwise a very dry and relatively clear night for most. And again tomorrow, partly to mostly sunny sky. Barrow saw the sun again today, so welcome back to the sun there, however brief and however shrouded by clouds it may be. There will be some drier and perhaps more clear skies working their way as the ridge of high pressure moves east just a little bit. That'll bring in some of that drier air for you from the west, so keep watching to the south if you didn't see it today. High pressure will be about 1,047 millibars, and already by Thursday we can tell that pressure gradient is really tightening up here across southeast. So by Thursday night again around the Douglas area, that's when those winds should start to come up. And again, we're watching for winds from the north and east gusting to 60 to 80 miles per hour. Potential for that means, again, a high wind watch starts up on Thursday night. Out across the west on Friday, the next weather disturbance tries to cut in, but remember, this weather system is rough, tough, and hard to bluff. It does not want to give it up right now, and because of that, we already see the next front dying or falling apart. So we usually kind of break that front into pieces. They're telling us that it's either coming or going, and in this case, it's on the way out. Trough of low pressure sits across the eastern Gulf. This is not much of a delineation of temperatures, but it does have a valley of air. And in this case, that high pressure wants to rush in and fill that all the way down to the very bottom of the gorge, and that is off the Pacific Northwest. A generally clear sky will be seen across most of southeast for Friday. There will be some clouds from time to time across the Northernland Canal and down toward Juneau, but a lot of that you'll notice for weather will be wind on Friday. So the strongest winds expected during the day as we get into Friday and perhaps even into Saturday for you in southeast. Here's a look at temps today. Fairly mild across most of southeast, lower to mid 30s there. We've heard reports down around southeast of the crocus popping up already. So wow, that would be an early spring, I suspect, but certainly possible there, and we believe those reports as we get them. So enjoy your flowers as you may. 34 around parts of the capital city today in Sitka, down around Ketchikan, Craig, and Klawock, just a hair or two above freezing. 28 around Hyder, Prince William Sound. We had 27 degrees in Valdez, 33 in Cordova. It's 35 in Homer today. Out around, Kenai, 33, about 30 in Anchorage, 33 in Talkeetna. As you get into the mountains and the passes there, it was about 23 degrees out to the west, 0 in Fairbanks, 5 below for Eagle, and 6 below in Fort Yukon. Arctic Village had 13 below, and Barrow had 0, while Kaktovik was 16. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse were holding in the single digits today. Wainwright was 6 below. Kivalina had 11, Shishbref 19. Shaktoolik 27, and Nome was 22. Galena about 20 degrees. Russian Mission around 21. McGrath only 9 with Bethel at 15. Into Bristol Bay, mid-20s there for King Salmon and Dillingham. Lake Iliamna in the lower 20s. Kodiak Island was in the upper 30s this afternoon. Most of the Alaska Peninsula was in the mid to upper 30s. In fact, Sand Point was nearly 40. It looked like AKwx was 41, one of the warmest spots in the state today, actually hitting 42 late this afternoon and 36 in Shemya. Now, overnight lows will stay in the teens and 20s for southeast, closer to the 20-degree mark around Anchorage and the Kenai Peninsula. Prince William Sound in teens and 20s for you, 17 below around Fort Yukon, and 5 to 10 below for the North Slope. Around Nome, expect a low of 13, southwest, low to mid-teens. The Alaska Peninsula and the Chain in the 20s and 30s tonight, with St. Paul at 34 and up to 35 tomorrow. Low to mid-30s for southeast, south central in the 20s and 30s, 36 in Kodiak. And let's see, Fort Yukon 2 below, looks like 15 above though for Barrow, south and west. Nome 24, 24 for Bristol Bay regions as well, 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula and the Chain. Now for IFR, we expect clear sailing for most of southeast and really most of the interior. Out across the west, IFR conditions are expected there, and across the lower to middle Yukon Valley and across the front that's moving through the Bering Sea, we can expect patchy IFR. Most of the interior by the afternoon should see improving conditions. You'll see that on the map here in just a minute. IFR continues for a good chunk of the Chukchi coast and along the front in the Bering Sea. Otherwise, MVFR conditions are expected there. And Aktuvik Pass, we expect to see VFR as you go around the Horn, Adigan Pass, VFR, as well as Lake Clark and Merrill Pass. And you'll see that all of these passes are expecting VFR conditions as we go. Windy Pass, we expect to see VFR there, as well as Isabel Pass, Mentasta Pass, visual flight rule continues. Tanita Pass, VFR should be expected. And Portage Pass, as well as Chilkoot and White Pass, visual flight rules should be seen there. Now, with this large and in charge ridge of high pressure across most of Alaska, we're still getting some warming sneaking up the eastern side of the Gulf, but notice this. A pocket or a bubble of warm air up across the Chukchi Sea has levels at 2,000 to 4,000 feet offshore there. The surface freezing line is also inland now across eastern parts of Russia, and we have a little bit of warming here. So a weird kind of pattern, isn't it? When you look at the icing potential, most of this is stretched along the boundary of the front across the Bering above 5,000 feet. Another pocket there a little bit closer to the Alaska Peninsula above 4,000. And then across the Beaufort Sea above 4,000 feet there. And no other major or significant threats are expected tomorrow. Here's a jet stream. What a mess, huh? Here's a low out across the North Pacific moving off of eastern Asia. High pressure across the, let's say the eastern Seward Peninsula and the Kobuk and Noatak valleys there. And that's sending that warmth way into the Arctic. Well, the cold air has to go somewhere, right? Because we know there's still cold air across the poles, and this is starting to make a comeback down across the Pacific Northwest and a good chunk of central and western Canada. So if you've got travel plans into the Midwest in the next couple days, maybe even the next week, there will be some colder waves working their way into the lower 48, even though a lot of what we're seeing here in Alaska is milder, drier, at least for now. The superhighway of weather, that's way down here. That's this bottom line, and it's keeping a lot of that really active weather out of moving into Alaska, save for the wind, of course. So here's the 9,000 foot level winds, and you can see high pressure around the Kotzebue Sound region. Northerlies working down the Alcan border, about 40 to 50 knots. Strong south and easterly flow cutting across the Alaska Peninsula, and then the southerlies return across the Bering. Wind speeds for southeast will be really depending on that pressure gradient here, especially at the surface. So watch for those changes there. 3,000 feet, the high center is a little bit further inland, not too much though. The pattern is pretty much identical. North and east winds moving out over the Gulf, and we've got winds cutting into the Susitna Valley and over the Alaska Range about 10 to 25. Northwesterlies across the Brooks Range and the North Slope about 25 to 40 knots, and then a strong southerly flow working across the Bering there, anywhere from 30 to 40 knots. Now, turbulence, that will be the key for your flying tomorrow. Watch for developing and expanding areas of isolated severe across southeast, low-level wind shear and turbulence, especially around the Lynn Canal, and developing as that Taku wind event sets up. So again, in southeast, watch for thumps and bumps and even more as you get into your daytime tomorrow. That will get worse by tomorrow night, and then really get probably as bad as it will be on Friday and into early Saturday morning. Now, outside of Prince William Sound and Middleton Island, you'll get into some occasional moderate there as we've got some wind working in from the east there. And along the southern end of the Alaska Peninsula and into the central chain below 4,000 feet. Also watching for the wind to continue for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. Remember, blizzard conditions there will probably preclude a whole lot of flying, at least for right now. But even if conditions ease up there, there will still be some bumpy conditions just north and east of the Brooks Range below 4,000. That's a look at your aviation weather. I'll be back with the rest of your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned. Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining me once again is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Eric, welcome back to the program.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
And once again, you brought some wonderful satellite pictures to show us and do a little show and tell about. It's just amazing. I can get lost in satellite pictures all day. What did you bring today?
Right. Well, weather satellites, what are they good for? Yeah. Of course, there's the pretty pictures that they bring us. You know, we've got a picture here from April of 2012. Okay. The Sumi NPP satellite, it's what they call a polar orbiter, which means it covers Alaska because we're near the pole. Beautiful image. You can see a storm off of southeast Alaska, the sea ice along the Bering Sea up into the Arctic. A really nice picture, and this is important because it allows a forecaster to see where the storms are, where the ice is, where the clear areas are. You need to know where the weather is now if you're going to forecast it into the future. Exactly. So satellites give us these good pictures. This is called surveillance of the weather. And you know, that same satellite also has another picture from a little more recently, August of 2014, Tropical Storm Iselle bearing down on the Hawaiian Islands. Okay. Hawaii doesn't get hit by a whole lot of tropical storms or hurricanes. Sometimes it does. And here's a picture from the same satellite, the Sumi NPP Polar Orbiter. It shows Tropical Storm Iselle approaching the Hawaiian Islands from the southeast. You can see the storm swirling away there, and then there's the Hawaiian Islands. This is a tropical storm, not quite as strong as a hurricane because we don't see the eye wall in there. This is still a serious weather system. And all of this information comes just from that satellite picture. It's so much information, and it's wonderful to look at. You see the beauty and the awe of nature right there depicted in that weather satellite. We call it a polar orbiter because the satellite flies high over the globe. Maybe we could look here at we happen to bring the planet Earth with us. This is our satellite. A polar orbit flies really close to the Earth, maybe 800 kilometers over the Earth, and goes up over the pole and then back down, and then the Earth spins under the satellite as it goes by. That's in contrast to the geostationary birds, which are much further out. And they don't view Alaska quite as well. So we love those polar orbiter satellites here in Alaska.
So when we're a lot closer, we get much better details and imagery and an idea of a better maybe position of what's going on when it's passing right over Alaska or right over Hawaii.
Yes, exactly right. The polar orbiter gives such a good view of places like Alaska. And because it's close to the planet, there's another aspect of satellites in the polar orbit that is helpful for weather forecasting. It's an aspect that's maybe not as immediately obvious as the pretty pictures that we see. And that is the capacity for the satellite to produce what's called a sounding. That is finding the vertical profile of temperature and moisture in the atmosphere. We've all heard of weather balloons. Weather balloons are launched here in Alaska twice a day at a number of airports, everywhere from Barrow to St. Paul Island to Kodiak, Anchorage and Fairbanks, Yakutat, a number of places. Launch these balloons, and we've got a picture of a balloon being launched at an airport, and the balloon goes up. It's pulling a little package, an instrument package with it that reports temperature, pressure, humidity data back, and we use that information to help feed what are called numerical weather prediction models.
The models.
The models, right. It's a mouthful, so we just call it the models. And these computer simulations, these models, they're computer programs that simulate the motion of the atmosphere. Well, how does a model know what the future will be like? You have to tell the model what things are like now. And you give it all kinds of information, including information from these satellite sounders. Very important. Just how important are they? We have a recent, comparatively recent study that really brings home, and this is Superstorm Sandy. We have a track image here of the track of Hurricane Sandy. Was down in the Caribbean around Cuba, and then it moved north over the ocean, offshore of the eastern seaboard, and then at the last minute, Sandy made what's called the left hook. It turned hard to the left and slammed into New Jersey. Was a major problem for the mid-Atlantic states, a calamity. It fused with another weather system and became known, this is not an official title, but Superstorm Sandy. It was quite the weather event. Well, the modelers, after the event, there's a group of modelers in Europe. They have a very good model, a frustratingly good model if you're the Americans trying to pursue their excellence. They reran their model afterwards in what's called a data denial study, where they kept everything the same. So this is 6 months after Sandy, but they went back, They reran the same model. They fed the model the same initial conditions, that is telling the model, okay, here's where we think Sandy is, down near Cuba in the Caribbean. Everything was the same as it was in the real forecast, except they didn't let the model know.
No satellite data.
No satellite data.
Okay.
So we're going to put that over here, no satellite data for you. The resulting forecast 5 days out, back when the real Sandy was happening and the model had the satellite data, the forecast was pretty good. We've got a graphic here on the left side. We show the forecast of where Sandy would be, and that's the red bullseye on the left. It's just south of where it actually wound up hitting. Not a bad forecast from this computer simulation, 120 hours out. On the right, you see the same model, but it didn't have the satellite data to help it understand things. And the storm is way offshore. It misses. The forecast is more accurate when the model has the satellite data. So that's the idea today we want to convey, is weather satellites. They're important because they show us the pictures of where storms are. We see good examples of this. Yeah, the surveillance right now, it's great to look at those pictures. And in addition, behind the scenes, maybe not immediately obvious, but the models have to have that satellite data for them to be good forecasts. And then a meteorologist uses that information to help everyone with the forecast of where the storms will be in the future.
That is fascinating information that we can look at, see where things have been, because you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. That's that old adage there. But seeing that satellites are actually helping us move forward in the weather information system is pretty amazing stuff.
You bet.
And if you want to check out Eric's satellite images that he's been talking about, whether that's something from today or last week or even much further back in Alaska history, you can easily do that yourself. Go to www.gina.alaska.edu and you can find those images there. Eric, thanks so much for joining us once again. And again, we will join you hopefully again soon for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, where you'll tell us more really cool information about the satellites over our heads in Alaska. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time. Wouldn't be Alaska weather if we didn't have Eric on the show, right? Here's a look at the sea ice edge, and as you would expect, it is still retreating a little bit with a strong, warming southerly flow working its way across the upper levels of the Bering Sea, so no surprise there, and not a whole lot of change there around the Cook Inlet or many areas out across the Bering, except for that slow retreat continuing in the region. So watch out for some pockets of open water. We've got Polina there just north and west of Point Lay, and we were monitoring one there just north of Shishmaref. Don't have a whole lot of new information on that right now, but if you see something like that that's out of sorts for your area or something you think we should know about, send us a note anytime. Weather.gov/Anchorage/ice has ways to reach the sea ice analysts, and they would love to have your report. Here's a look at southeast Alaska there for Thursday. Already setting up with northerly winds, 30 to 35 in just about all the areas except for some of our southern zones, 15 to 20 knots there. Most regions, though, at that 35 knot range are going higher, 6 to 7 feet inside and 9 feet on the outside as we get into Thursday. Now look at this, big wind coming in on Friday. Once again, a high wind watch is posted for the Juneau area starting Thursday night, going into Saturday morning for wind gusts that could be from the north and east as high as 60 to 80 miles per hour. Now, in the marine areas, we're already talking about 50-knot winds in the Lynn Canal, 12-foot seas there, 5 to 7-foot seas a little bit further south, and 35 to as high as 50-knot winds across the outer coast with seas there from 14 to 15 feet on Friday. Across South Central, nothing quite that strong. 20 to 25 in and outside of Prince William Sound, 2-foot seas on the inside there, 5-foot seas coming down Cook Inlet and west of the Barrens, and 20 to 25 knots on either side of Kodiak Island with 5 to 7-foot seas there on Thursday. Winds actually slow down and become a little more variable in the northern part of Cook Inlet on Friday and outside of Resurrection Bay. Northerlies continue out across Prince William Sound and outside of Middleton Island, 10 to 20 knots there with a 2 to 4-foot sea and 5 to 9-foot seas around Kodiak Island. North and northwesterlies from the Barrens and Kamishak Bay northward into Cook Inlet with a 20-knot wind. For the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay, an east to northeast wind will be the rule. Inside of the bay, 20 knots with a 4-foot sea, 10 to 12-foot seas across the Pacific with 25 to 30 knot winds on Thursday. As we get into Friday, not a whole lot of a change in direction, but we'll keep winds at about 20 to 25, 3 to 6-foot seas in the Bering Sea coast, and 10 to 13-foot seas there on the Pacific coast for your Friday. For the Aleutians, you'll notice winds hovering around 30 to 35 knots across the central and eastern chain. We'll get a little bit of a change around the front, and then we'll pick those winds back up as we get from Kiska to Attu, 40 knots with a 19-foot sea on Thursday. Now, as we get into Friday, notice the winds all back from the east and southeast, looking at 25 to 35 knots for the Unalaska to Adak region, and then 40 knots from Kiska to Attu, talking about 18 to 21 foot seas there on Friday across the Aleutians. Again, all of this being worked northward into high pressure rotating around the north and western parts of Alaska. For Thursday, the west coast showing east and southeasterly winds over the ice, 30 knots around St. Lawrence Island, 35 knots for St. Matthew, and 25 to 30 knots from the Kuskokwim Bay out toward the Pribilofs, with a 14-foot sea around the Pribilof Islands for Thursday. For Friday, easterlies are pretty much still intact, 20 to 30 knots there, 14-foot seas around St. Matthew, and 10-foot seas around St. Paul and St. George on that 25-knot wind. For the north coast, you're looking at south and westerly winds that are strong across Barrow to Point Lay and out toward Prudhoe Bay, but really going around Kaktovik and the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Remember, there's a blizzard warning here all the way until early Thursday morning, so whiteout conditions are possible, as well as strong and gusty winds there up around 50 miles per hour at times. Across Kotzebue Sound, a southeast wind at 30. And then as we get into Friday, those winds diminish a little bit, easterlies at 25, and more of a west and northwesterly flow working its way across the Beaufort Seacoast as winds diminish there as well, 30 to 35. Recapping tonight's weather, I want to really pass on the blowing and drifting snow issue. We have probably blizzard conditions. The whiteouts will be the biggest problem there with the blizzard warning still in effect. That goes until tomorrow morning. But I want you to keep an eye on the pressure gradient here across southeast, because this really looks fairly tight as we get into Thursday night. Winds start to pick up around the Juneau area, and they'll be breezy for many parts of the Panhandle. But right now they look like they'll be the strongest around the Juneau region for a potential Taku wind event, with a high wind watch setting up starting tomorrow night and going all the way into Saturday morning for gusts 60 to 80 miles per hour. Out across the west, high pressure still in charge, so that's going to keep a lot of this precipitation out of mainland Alaska. So dry and generally smooth sailing for most of the mainland as we head into the weekend. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
If you're interested in serving on your local Federal Subsistence Regional Advisory Council, the deadline to apply is Friday, February 3rd. Call 1-800-478-1456 for more information.